But I think that for me, what happened was I was putting so much time and energy into spiritual growth via meditation, yoga, bhakti yoga, chanting, mudra, breath work, pranayama, just all the things that I just kind of transcended the box, you know, um, and so I had to make some changes.
Welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast, a production of Helping the Herd. Helping the Herd is committed to empowering individuals to liberate themselves from the patterns that keep them from creating their ideal life. If you like this podcast, visit helpingtheherd.com to find resources and personalized coaching to empower you to be your best self. Hey everyone, welcome to the Do You Feel Heard podcast. Today we have Justin joining us. Justin has been a client. He had finished and completed the program with working with a coach with his partner, and if I do say so myself, did an excellent job and is now thriving. And he's also now pursuing coaching himself and sharing this program and this work with others. So Justin, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome,
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah, it's good to see
Appreciate
you.
that.
Derek, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's great to finally meet Justin. I've heard good things from Ian, of course. Nothing but good. I appreciate you being on the podcast. I'm good today. Life's good. It's good.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Ian. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Sorry, I'm pouring tea.
You pour tea? I've never
Always.
seen it.
Yeah, no, how out of character. Um, so yeah, Justin, let's start with a little bit about you. What would you like the viewers to know? Who is Justin? And, a little brief, recap, little bio.
Hold on one second. I gotta close this door. Well, let's see. Where do I begin? Such a cool, rich life. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was born to a fairly well-to-do family. Father was an attorney. My mother owned a flower shop. It was a blended family, meaning my dad had two previous children from a previous marriage before he married my mother, which I think is where a lot of the family dysfunction sprang from. Resentments from my half-siblings. I began the pursuit of self-destruction probably earlier than this, but I remember when I first started looking for things outside of myself to change how I felt. Was around about 9 years old. I started getting into the alcohol cabinet and stealing the cigarette butts from the ashtrays and things of that nature. That quickly spiraled, man. Like, I caught my first felony case when I was 13. I was dropping acid pretty much 3 or 4 times a week by the time I was 12. I shot up for the first time when I was 15. And that pretty much encapsulates the next 26 years of my life, from 9 to 35. Age 35... there was divine intervention in the form of Tulsa Police Department, which I'm grateful for that, because had they not taken me to jail that night, I would have likely been dead very, very soon after. I weighed about 117 pounds. I had no veins left in my arms, legs, or neck. I was completely emaciated, and a couple of weeks after being in jail, I detoxed, and then I started hallucinating, and I had a pretty significant spiritual experience from my perception. I spent 30 days in mental health seg, which is like a jail cell inside of the jail cell. They lock you away from the rest of the criminals because they deem you unfit. Stayed there for 30 days, and it was just like this roaring chaos in my mind. Just looking at all of the dichotomies of my life. And really, when a couple things happened, one is I realized that I was responsible for the condition I was in, which is something that I had never ever conceived as a possibility. It was always everybody else's fault. It was the Catholic Church's fault. It was the school's fault. It was mom and dad's fault. It was the store's fault for catching me stealing, whatever it was. But I realized that the mess I found myself in was 100% my responsibility and my own making. Another thing happened was just like through all the chaos and things swirling around in my head, I just had this audible voice and this peace and this serenity that came over me that just said, just don't use drugs again. You can have the world. And I tell that story because in that moment of psychosis, there were a lot of things that I saw, because I kind of saw like a path. I kind of saw you can keep doing it, what you're doing, and you're going to go this way, or you can stop doing what you're doing, and then like these different things came to fruition. And a number of those things that I saw happening once I stopped destroying myself with drugs and alcohol happened. I ended up having a child. I ended up getting cured of Hep C. Just a number of different things that were very synchronistic, that like kind of like a little God nod of like, yep, this is real. Through a 12-step program, I found my way into meditation. And soon meditation became a daily, multiple time a day practice. After a period of time, when I sat, things just kept coming on my heart to learn to teach. And what happened as a result is I applied to go to do mindful meditation teacher certification with Tara Brach and Jack Kornfield. And I was like, okay, they have to accept me. They're never going to accept me. So I've done my work, God, the Creator. I've done the work. I did the action, and they accepted me. So I had to do the training. So that was, it's a blessing. It's been a great journey. And through that, I got some feedback through one of my classes. People were interested in chakras and chakra clearing and this and that. So again, in meditation, go learn to be a Kundalini yoga teacher, which I had only done one class previously to my teacher training. And I was like, oh, I guess. And it just kept coming up, so I did it. So now I teach Kundalini yoga workshops and, do one-on-ones with people from a spiritual perspective from time to time. And soon we'll be embarking on this communication coach journey. So, that's kind of a snapshot. There's a lot of details in between that I kind of glossed over. But in the interest of time, I didn't want to go too far down the rabbit hole.
Wow. That was a great place to start. No, thank you for sharing. I'm curious about 99 things from that. I don't even know where to start. But first, thanks for sharing your experience. I can tell you are an open guy who is looking to, see the world clearly and is okay with where you've been, and you seem to have a good focus for where you're going. Wow. Yeah, if you don't mind, and I'll jump right into a few of the curiosities from here.
I've spent the last year and a half with Justin pretty much once a week, so I know a lot of answers to these questions. So I would love for you to take the lead, but I do have some questions I'll ask in a second. But go ahead and take it away.
Awesome, yeah. Ian will not be surprised, as maybe other listeners, that the meditation bit, really caught my eye. I'm a meditation teacher myself, and I really respect Tara and Jack. I've actually met Jack Kornfield at a meditation retreat. That guy is so cool. Man, his eyes, he has these deep, wells of I don't know, they're into the soul that just, they're infinite. You look into his eyes and you're just like, what's going on in there? Such a big heart. So I'm curious more about the meditation part and why you started doing that multiple times a day, how that became, a practice for you, and what called you to want to be able to teach it.
Yeah. So, I was in Narcotics Anonymous. That's where I got out of prison. And I went to a recovery house, and I drank when I was out, which could have got me kicked out and sent back to prison, but I did it anyways. And I finally surrendered to that process when I had big emotions and I didn't know how to process them, because I had spent 26 years putting drugs and alcohol on feelings. And I tried to get back together with this girl and that was with when I went to prison, and it fell to shit, as it probably should have. So I surrendered to this program. I got a sponsor, and I was like, okay, He's like, what are you willing to do? And I'm like, I'm willing to do whatever the hell you tell me to do, because I don't know how to live, and I don't want to feel this way, and I don't want to use. And so I just did everything he said. And one of the things he said was, is you've got to work a step a month. And so I started working the 12 steps. And on the 11th step, it says we sought through prayer and meditation. We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. And that was the most, every one of those steps, it includes things like inventory and making amends and different stuff, like just basically cleaning up the past. But it's a kind of a roadmap to get there. And when I hit that 11th step, you know what I mean? Like, I did the work, like, very as a matter of fact. Like, okay, this is what it says. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do whatever the hell it says, because clearly I don't know what's right or wrong at this point, you know? And when I hit the 11th step, it says, sought through prayer and meditation. So I had tried to meditate earlier on in the process, but I could not sit still. I had too much stuff rumbling around. But by the time I got all that stuff cleaned out and I was on the 11th step, it started with the insight timer. Like, I started with counting breaths, and I started with guided meditations. Soon, like, I was like, I'm going to do it once a day for a year. If nothing changes, I'll just stop. No loss, right? But much to my, surprise, it was like invigorating. It was like everything that I always sought through obliteration. You know what I mean? Like, I just wanted to be able to be with myself. But little did I know, like, jamming needles in my arm and consuming drugs and alcohol was the opposite of being with myself. It was actually making me be further away with the illusion that everything is okay. So when I hit meditation, it was organic. It was something I did myself. There was no hangover. So I just started doing it more. It started making me feel good. I started noticing that I was dealing with life differently. I noticed that I was able to be with emotions differently. And so soon I found that I was doing it, in the morning, and then doing it in the afternoon, and then before bed. And pretty soon I found myself, like, excusing myself from social engagements so I could go home and meditate. And it became a priority. And one of the things too is my first sponsor was, like, really big on morning routines. Like, when you get out of bed, like, what are you going to do? Like, are you just going to jump up and throw your clothes on and rush out the door and be in a hurry the rest of the day? Or are you going to take time? Are you going to take time to cultivate your relationship and a connection with the divine? And what does that look like? And what steps are you going to take? So meditation had quickly became an integral part of my life, a foundation, if you will, really, where all other things were built from, and where I went to get guidance. I stopped listening to this so much, and I started listening to my heart, and I started listening to, like, what was coming up. Because there's a difference between, like, the monkey mind racing and, like, a genuine, like, download, like a genuine insight. And it just feels different, So that's kind of how I got into meditation, and kind of how it happened. Like, as far as teaching went, like, it was just kept coming up. It was like this nagging bug bite or something that was, like, not going away. Like, here I am. I'm still here. You're not taking action, so I'm going to keep pushing, until eventually I was like, okay. And I just looked into it, and I found that 2-year program with Tara and Jack, and I was like,
2 years,
give it a try. So I did it, and they had a practicum, and I ended up with, like, 20, 30 people at every one of my classes, and I was like, oh, look, So that's kind of my meditation journey. I still meditate. I'm not going to say daily, because I fall short, but I strive to meditate in the mornings before I start my day, more times than not. Spiritual practices and things of that nature still are, like, the foundation of how I start my day, most days. I strive for every day, but I also give myself grace.
That's right. Give yourself grace. You got to. Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing a 2-year program. That's intense, man. And I just love what you said about getting you from here to here, getting from, like, the head to the heart. That's something Ram Dass would talk about a lot. I actually I found Ram Dass through Duncan Trussell, and Duncan Trussell actually got to meet a podcaster and comedian. He got to meet Ram Dass, and he said, what we have to do is get you from here to here. He literally even did the same motion that you did. So that really resonates with me, and it makes sense why it was such a big journey for you. You know, they say addiction is a disease of isolation. I can really feel that. And so, you know, it's almost like you're saying you made friends with yourself in your mind and whatever was going on here, and then you were able to better connect to the areas that were fruitful for you. Very cool. The other thing I just want to note is that it's funny that you do the Kundalini teaching. We just had another Kundalini yoga teacher on the podcast not long ago. So like 20% of our guests now are Kundalini yoga teachers. All right, we've got a niche.
Yeah, that's going to be our new focus, I guess, inadvertently. I had a couple of questions that I wanted to touch on. So what I heard you say was that you had found yourself in jail after, you know, several decades of making choices that weren't in your highest good. And you found yourself in jail for 30 days, which in many ways forced you into a detox. And during that process, you found yourself, what I am paraphrasing as like a fork in the road. I can go here or I can go here, but I gotta, you know, I have to make a choice here. It's in my hands to make this choice. And so just curious if you have any thoughts about maybe, I mean, do you recommend everybody go to jail who's on this path, or are there other ways that you maybe see that they could find a similar realization? Because if you don't find if you wouldn't have been forced into that situation, you wouldn't have found the fork in the road. You would have continued on your path. And so while I'm sure no one on this podcast is advocating for jail and that is a good thing for people to go to jail, it did provide you with the opportunity to really look at yourself, look at the situation objectively without the opportunity to take drugs or alcohol to kind of numb or distract you from that, looking at yourself honestly and objectively. Do you have any thoughts about maybe anyone who's listening to this who's in a similar position now that you were in before you went to jail? Do you have anything that may be coming to mind of how you would advise them or encourage them to also find that fork?
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's different. And so I think it takes a different modality and a very specific set of circumstances to create that deep surrender that is required for one to put down the sledgehammer, you know, and, you know, I like to say, you know, stop the self-destruction and begin the reconstruction, you know. And, you know, it's just, there's a lot of things that go into that. You know, people, places, and things are really hard to get away from, especially if you've spent so many years developing kind of that situation, so to speak. But as far as like somebody looking for a way out, I mean, it's just, it's so destructive and so deceiving. The trickery is just unbelievable. Like, the thing that's killing you is the thing that you've tricked yourself into believing is the thing that's giving you life. You know, is jail the only solution? Absolutely not. I mean, you know, there's you know, usually you have to create enough space between the act of addiction and detox, because depending upon what substances one is on, you know, there's a physical dependency which forces them to do things against their will. They're almost trapped between like being like with massive debilitating withdrawal symptoms, flu-like symptoms, or an inability, like depending upon the type of drug they're on, you know, there has to be some space created there for the healing to take place. You know, from that perspective, I mean, there's detoxes, there's holistic detox coaches, there's, you know, a number of different modalities that one can use, but I had to hit a brick wall. Like something had to like pluck me up and smack me around and get me to like, whoa, wait. I had to have some serious help. And it wasn't like human help. Like my mother helped, you know, helped me almost all the way to my grave. Um, she even says today, had she had the money, she'd have bailed me out. And if she'd have bailed me out, I'd probably be dead today. You know what I mean? So I think it's just like divine timing and karma, really. I mean, it's not that people are helpless and there's nothing at all they can do. I mean, you can always, you know, strive to make the changes on your own. Reach out to a coach, reach out to a detox coach, reach out to a facility to get some detox. But once that initial transition is done, it's imperative that that void that is left that one was filling with drugs and alcohol begin to be filled with constructive spiritual things. Like I believe wholeheartedly addiction is a spiritual ailment. There's a kind of a spiritual deficiency, so to speak, where something happened, and I believe the majority of the issues is tied to childhood trauma of some form or fashion. I think there's statistics out now that show the large majority of people that struggle with addiction have some form of trauma, whether it be family trauma or sexual trauma or, trauma from outside the family, whatever. That it kind of predisposes people to change how they feel, to seek an escape, to change reality. But once you're able to create that distance between the physical addiction, you got to get plugged in somewhere. Into a community. My experience is that it takes a community. I spent 9 years, almost 9 years in Narcotics Anonymous, and the thing that created all my growth had become the thing that was keeping me from growing.
Say more.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, say more. What does that mean?
So, in the beginning, I didn't know how to live. The only thing I knew was ways and means to get more, lies, deceit, all the things that had been cultivated over the years. And Narcotics Anonymous in the beginning gave me the framework to dig myself out of the dilemma I got myself in. But what I found was, actions like identifying as an addict. I believe words have power. And so am I going to sit around, even though I've been off drugs for 9 years, and continue to call myself an addict? Or, on the other side of that is the community structure, or the dogma, if you will, dictates that you have to identify as an addict. So, here's the dilemma. Do I stop identifying as an addict and still go? Or, and face possible ridicule, which I did? Or do I, what do you do? As you start to grow and change in these things, these different perspectives that have been in some ways enforced on one begin to not fit anymore. So I found myself in this dilemma to where I could continue to pretend that I'm this thing just to hold on to the community, or start looking for other community. You know what I mean? And so that's why I say, like, the thing that was facilitating all the growth had begun stifling my growth, keeping me from growing, because there was just so much available. And there came not that I'm like speaking from a place of ego. It just had gotten to a place to where it felt uncomfortable to say, "Hi, I'm Justin. I'm an addict." It felt uncomfortable to continuously pretend like Narcotics Anonymous is the only way, which is a large amount of the perspectives there. And don't get me wrong, like I have nothing. It works, and I would send anyone there in a New York instant as they were beginning to get their life together. If they had nowhere else to go, I would absolutely present it as an option. But I think that for me, what happened was I was putting so much time and energy into spiritual growth via meditation, yoga, bhakti yoga, chanting, mudra, breath work, pranayama, just all the things that I just kind of transcended the box, and so I had to make some changes.
I hear you. Thanks so much for sharing.
Yeah. I don't know if I specifically answered your question, Ian, but I did my best.
Well, your response was wonderful. Thank you for sharing.
It was. No, I really resonate with a lot that you said. I've had similar conversations recently, like around these nouns, addict, or even also recovery is a word that I have lots of thoughts on, and it's hard to accept that something was lost, and what am I recovering, and then what do I get once I've recovered it? Where do I go from there? Is there a growth after that? So I do think these are really good and probably common questions, maybe dissonances that people feel. And I really like that you talked about addiction is a spiritual failure. So I just thought that was really good. And I think there's a big meaning crisis right now in the world. There's a spiritual crisis. I think a lot of people are trying to fill some kind of void with something, and we don't even know what it is until you get quiet and still, or until you reach you didn't use the term rock bottom, but a brick wall or something like that. It can be really hard to even know what we're running from. And I think it makes sense that the NA was a vehicle for you, and maybe still is to some degree, but what's your relationship to that vehicle? What's your relationship to that term addict, if you did need to surrender to a label for some period of time because it was helpful? But yeah, I try to think of things more fluidly than nouns. I think about something that Alan Watts says, that in different languages, he talks specifically about Chinese, that everything's a lot more verby than nouny. And in Western languages, we see a lot of just stasis, and it doesn't really capture this flow of life that you're really well describing through the flow of your life. And something can be useful, it can be a vehicle for a long time, but that doesn't mean it's forever. That's one of the main teachings of Buddhism, is that nothing's permanent, and permanence is part of this. And there's a little saying or so that I'll paraphrase around picking a boat whenever you start doing spiritual practice. They talk about the wisdom of one boat, picking one boat. Don't try to do every single practice, because you're not really going to get far with any one. So they talk about picking one boat and maybe sticking with it for a while. But then you'll hear teachers continue that and be like, well, it would be a little silly, though, if you sailed across the ocean and you get to the other side and you land on the shore with your boat and you keep carrying your boat. Might not be the thing right then. You might need to leave that boat. And that's what I'm hearing a lot of your journey. And I think it's very nuanced and right. And it makes sense to me that your path is going to meander. 9 years is a long time. 9 years is a long time. So yeah, I really just like that overall concept of what can be growth can then become stagnation. What can be skillful or helpful can then hold us back. And I do think that's where so much suffering comes from, and so many problems in relationships come from, looking to the past for what we need, what is right. But that changing, you have to be able to look ahead.
Yeah. And I think that was the biggest thing for me. Like, I had this epiphany. I was, somewhere, I'm sure a plant medicine ceremony helped facilitate some of that epiphany, but the intention I went into that ceremony was to let go of identities and things that no longer serve me. And I fully believe I had a full-blown ego death in that ceremony, because my life changed rapidly afterwards. But I say all of that.
What medicine was it?
I'm sorry?
What medicine was it in that ceremony?
Psilocybin. I mean, there was other medicines like Hape, Sangha, and Combo prior to the psilocybin journey. But it was a hero's dose, and it was of a rather potent strain. Matter of fact, the facilitator doesn't use that strain anymore after that ceremony. But I say all of that just to say, I just got to this place where I had realized that for 26 years, drug addict defined who I was. And then for 9 years, even though I wasn't using anymore, addict or recovering addict defined me. So I asked myself this question, like, how much longer am I going to hold on to this thing? Like, it's not how I live, it's not what I do, but yet I focused so much energy into this, like, don't use, like, oh, I have to do X, Y, and Z to keep me from using again, and you know, and that's not my experience. Like the desire to use was lifted, and things had changed, and so I just was like, and it's funny you mentioned that thing about recovery too, because I just caught myself mid-sentence the other day saying I'm in recovery, and I realized after I said it has the exact same effect as I'm an addict. I'm still placing this label on me, and so I quickly corrected myself. I think it was at my workshop. I said, actually, I there was a period of time that I was addicted to drugs, rather than speaking it into where I'm at currently. So I think that the past does influence and affect how we arrive, as long as we let it. As long as we're letting that be the thing that's informing and dictating how we arrive in the here and now. And you had mentioned Ram Dass, and I just, I love him and follow him very closely. He always talks about the ego being identities created to navigate through life, and to keep us safe, to things we create in order to navigate the ebbs and flows of life. But the thing that it's about not necessarily that those identities need to go away, just that we need to become aware of those identities and aware of when they're impinging upon us, so as it's not in a compulsive manner or below a consciousness. It's within the realms of, okay, this thing is here, I have a choice. Am I going to, do I need this now, or is there maybe something better for this circumstance? And I think that's the trip, That's the trip. I mean, because there's times where I'm a dad, and there's times where I'm a husband, and then there's times when I'm a friend. And I mean, those are all egoic identities. But it's like, am I being a friend when I should be a dad, or am I being a dad when I should be a husband? When those lines start getting blurred and we start getting stuck in these identities, that's where it becomes really problematic. And I think that's what happened with me, is I just became so trapped in the drug addict mentality that I didn't know of any other identity. I mean, the majority of the time that I spent over that 9 years was all about finding myself. Like, who am I? Like, who the hell am I? What do I like? What do I don't like? Like, what makes me me? So it's just, it's a trip.
Yeah, that's one of it. Sorry, I was just going to throw it to you, in. That's one of your favorite questions. Who am I? I love that. And I love that you also have put it in, who am I today? To really get that nature of change. That's why I want to throw that little props to you for that one. I think of that often. And it's a good question.
Yeah, definitely. I've had obviously the privilege of having many conversations with you, Justin, and I'm, what you were just sharing about reminded me. I mean, we were working together when some of those, feelings were coming up around, why am I still identifying with this label? Why am I still calling or referring to myself as this thing that I no longer identify with? And I remember those conversations really going deep into, like, how am I supposed to grow from here, grow from this place, if I still have to be attached and, like, identify with that thing, like, that ultimately was hindering your growth and kind of preventing you from evolving from that version of yourself, because every moment we're a new version of ourselves, right? Every instance, every interaction with somebody, we've heard more things, we've learned more things, we've reflected on more things, we've experienced more things, and so each moment to moment is a new you. But if you are so deeply and desperately attached to this identity, you're not able to grow out of that identity. And we can extrapolate that into, victimhood even. Well, this thing happened to me, so I am now a victim because of this thing. And while, yes, that thing may have happened to you, and yes, wrong things were done, if you can't let that go and step into this new you that isn't shackled by this label or, essentially controlled and managed by this identity that you once, resonated with, and it was supportive then, if you can't let go of that, you cannot evolve from there. You cannot grow from there because you're still dragging this ball and chain that is this old identity that made you who you once were. And for as long as you drag it, you will still be that in some way.
Yeah, and that's what my experience was. I experienced the longer that I identified as an addict or an addict in recovery, the more solidified that became, and I felt myself kind of on the hamster wheel of the same crap coming up. Like there was no real, like there were certain things that were just like, that's just where they were. And it wasn't until I, stopped feeding that story and open to the possibility of something different that I was able to see, like, man, I don't have to like carry that around anymore. And then with that becomes, freedom. I mean, really, it's from the Buddhist perspective, equanimity. Am I able to hold that in both ways? Okay, this happened, this was a thing. Okay, fine, I'm holding it in love and light. Although it was also terribly difficult and destructive. But in the same frame, I also have gratitude. I had an epiphany when I was on a 10-day silent retreat for my teacher training, and that was, I was still pretty involved in Narcotics Anonymous, and a lot of that, I'm going to fight this disease, and I've got this disease, and just like, I've got to tell it to shut the fuck up, and this and that, like just throwing all this negativity at this concept. And I was like, wait a minute, like, no, you got to hold it with love and light. You got to hold it with compassion. That's what allows it to heal and release you. And I'll never forget coming back and saying that I was asked to speak at an NA meeting, and I said that, and I got some pretty interesting looks out of the crowd because that concept was a little bit wild for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense though too. Like if you're still identifying as an addict, well, what does an addict do? How does an addict think? How does an addict respond to pressure? How does an addict respond to stress? Versus how is Justin in this moment responding to stress? What does Justin, as he wants Justin to be, how does he respond, right? So again, attaching yourself to that old identity can really, keep you stuck in old cycles. It's beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Derek?
Yeah, and I don't think it's about dropping the old ones, but more an expansion. I think there's an inherent expansion of what you're talking about. A lot of the words you're talking about, growth, change. I think you talked about plant medicines and then meditation. We have these mind-expanding experiences. What are we expanding for? What's that? I think what we get is space where we can hold more of those. And like you were saying, with equanimity, with love, not rejecting some of them and holding too tightly to others. But can you be a father, a partner, have been through addiction, maybe feel like an addict sometimes and maybe feel like the exact opposite of that sometimes? Can you be a Buddhist and a Christian and a Kundalini yoga and whatever else, can you do all that together? And I think the answer is yes. And like you guys are pointing out, a lot of other people might react to that. I can totally see why you got some funny looks, because once you're in a frame, you see things as challenges to that frame unless you're ready. And I'm not going to judge anyone for not being ready. You're ready when you're ready. Unless you're ready to drop that or evolve with it or grow with it and have it not take up so much of the space, not be the only thing that you can have in this space that you are.
I think that makes sense too. Justin, we were talking about how you needed that. You needed NA. Without it, you would not have been able to accomplish what you did, and perhaps not knowing that there are other things that can also continue to support you could have you potentially desperately holding on to that identity, because without it, you're an addict. Without it, you're falling back into those old patterns. So you have to be an NA addict in recovery, whatever label, so that you can have that, that life preserver that kept you from drowning, and not realizing that there's 100 different other, maybe not 100, but there are many other paths that you could take that don't require you to maintain attachment to that old identity.
Yeah, and I think that that's so true. I don't necessarily think that it was NA that I needed. What I needed was something that spelled out a very specific sequence of steps for me to take in order to learn how to develop spiritually and how to integrate spirituality into my life. And I think that answers your previous question is what does one need to do that doesn't want to have to go to jail to get there? And that is, of course, once you get away from the immediate addictive behaviors and the using and the physiological responses that brings on, it's you got to put your feet on the spiritual path. You've got to find something that will help you develop a spiritual mindset and begin to heal and grow spiritually. For me, it just happened to be Narcotics Anonymous in the beginning.
What do you mean by spiritually?
What do I mean by spiritual? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, from my perspective, spirituality is the actions an individual takes upon themselves in order to grow closer to the divine or creator. Is kind of how I view it. So when I'm looking at things through a spiritual perspective, what I find more times than not is looking at it beyond the apparency of the circumstances. Meaning, okay, for instance, like I was going to go on a business venture, things fell apart. Okay, rather than becoming resentful or angered or whatever for the losses of this or that, it's okay, where's the lesson? Where's the lesson and the blessing in this? Looking beyond just the normal human reactions of loss and saying, okay, what's beyond that? What's beyond that? Where is the lesson in this? And I think that's the biggest thing from a spiritual perspective is being able to look past what's right in front of us and see the deeper meaning of things. And then, cultivating whatever practice one needs to cultivate, whether it's standing in the grass barefooted or, spending multiple hours pre-dawn doing pre-dawn sadhana, just really whatever it is. But I think that it's, it could be as easy as just prayer, or whatever is fits. That's the beautiful thing about spirituality is it's not a dogma that's like you have to just prescribe to it and that's it. Like spirituality, from my perspective, is something that is tailored to the individual, but one has to experiment. One has to use self-discipline to try these things on and see what works for them. They have to seek. So I think really spirituality is the desire to seek beyond the material realms. Would be a pretty good definition for it as well. But I mean, because you think about people that use drugs, essentially they're sticking themselves in the material universe. Like they're stuck. They're using chemicals, man-made chemicals, or chemicals that were derived from plants that were processed through man-made processes. They're consuming these things, usually in large amounts. And what's happening? It's making the world around them look more solid, more dangerous, more of a threat. So they get stuck in this trap of like, I got to do more because it makes the world look less of a threat. But the thing that they're doing is actually creating their own suffering. So it's just I mean, I've got multiple different perspectives on these things. I've contemplated it a lot.
I can tell.
I'd love to share a noticing that I had, like those that are seeking drugs, for instance, they're still seeking something outside of themselves, something higher than themselves, but instead of it giving them the clarity to realize something bigger and grander than this one aspect of this experience or this thing that is happening, it doesn't give them that. So they realize they need something outside of themselves, but the thing that they're reaching for isn't giving them what they're really needing. And so to pursue something in more of a spiritual path, that spiritual thing that you're seeking is something higher than yourself, but what it gives you is a perspective that is more broad and beyond the one aspect of your experience, right? So you go to jail, well, now I'm locked in this cage. That's one aspect, sure, But what are all the other aspects? Oh, now you have an opportunity to be away from these other things that were harming you. You have time to be with yourself. You have time to detox. You have resources, I'm sure, of some capacity that you didn't have outside, right? There's so many other things happening, doors opening, doors closing, realizations happening. There's so much there. Or you could just be like, damn, I'm in jail, I'm in a cage. This is the one thing that's happening to me. This is my experience. And I'm just going to tunnel vision focus on that. And when you take drugs, oftentimes that can be the thing that happens. You're seeking something outside you, but it really further grounds you instead of giving you a more broad perspective.
Yeah. Wow. I really appreciate this line of discussion, because I think when you talk about recovery stuff, when you talk about NAAA, a lot of people get stuck up on the higher power part, some kind of spiritual part. And my journey to whatever spirituality means to me has been meandering and confusing. And so one thing that came up during this, I just kind of want to offer as a bridge to anyone out there who has similar reservations, just a suggestion, like that when we talk about something higher power, I think you can pretty easily transfer that to outside of ourselves. And like you were saying, there's drugs and stuff are outside of ourselves, sure. But I think one of the things I've been most inspired by is seeing people who are transforming for others. It's not, a higher power per se, but I think others, just getting outside of what's good for me, what's bad for me, to, I've seen people just make incredible changes recently for their daughter and wife. It's just like amazing seeing the inspiration that can come, and they're doing it somewhat for themselves, but often for others. And I think that's where that Buddhist tenet of interdependence comes in. Once you start to see how we're not actually separate, addiction, that disease of isolation, of separation, once you start to see that there's not really that much of a separation, what I do affects you, what you do affects me, you can really start to do things for something outside of yourself. And I think that leads you to some definition of God, this totality of existence that's just, saving. It can be really saving.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what Ian was saying, you're using things outside of yourself when you're using drugs, and likewise when you're seeking, a power outside of yourself or unity with that power. And that was one of the biggest realizations that I had, was that I had to stop filling that void with self-destruction and start filling it with self-construction. And, it's the concept of a higher power. Yes, a lot of people struggle with it. And one of the main reasons why people struggle with it is religious trauma, dogma, largely Christianity. Surprisingly, from what I found, is what creates Christianity or Catholicism or any of the very rigid views create a lot of that trauma. Perhaps other religions as well, but I think here in the West it's just the most prevalent because that's the one that the majority of the people grow up with. But what I found is that my journey, like when I was kicked out of Catholic school at a very young age for basically being me. I mean, granted, I was, rebelling pretty hardcore, but I equated that to God. I was young. I equated the religious establishment as God. Okay, the church and the school have revoked my membership, therefore God has revoked my membership, and that doesn't make any sense to me. So, fine, you don't want me, God, I don't want you. To hell with you. Yeah, and that's how I live my life. Huh?
To be rejected by God, that's a big,
that was my perception.
It's a huge experience, yeah.
That was my perception. It was like, wait a minute, what happened to love everybody and be kind and you love thy neighbor and all this other stuff that you preach, and then that wasn't my experience. My experience was ridicule and the last guy to get picked to play baseball and football and, kicked out of school, just all the things. And so when I hit, the 12-step program, and it talked about finding a higher power. I mean, surprisingly enough, I just slung back into my childhood God because it was easy and comfortable. And it was already predefined, and I was being lazy, and it didn't take any work. And I did that for a long time. until I realized, wait a minute, I'm feeling the same thing I felt when I was in sixth grade. Like there's something missing, and I feel like I'm on the outside of this deal, and this doesn't make sense. I think that God created all cultures. Creator created every human being on every edge of this planet, which means that he created, people over in the Arab countries, and then you've got, the Muslim religion, and then the Jews, and then the Hindus, and the Buddhists, and so I was like, there's no way that God, who's unconditional love, can judge one as better or worse or chosen or not chosen. And I was like, this is just. And then Ram Dass talks about many rivers all lead to the sea. And then I was like, there's just, I can't with this. But I think the easiest perspective for those that are struggling with the concept of a higher power is, it's loving, caring, and greater than yourself. You look around at a child and all of their freedom, untainted by the woes and ways of the world, and they move pretty easily through emotions. Now, some emotions get expressed a lot bigger than others, but by and large, when me and my son have a conflict and we make amends, it's done. You have conflicts with an adult, like that relationship might be over forever, So you look. How can you look at that and not say there's something bigger at work here? You know what I mean? You look at nature, like how you just, those things. It doesn't have to be Jesus. It doesn't have to be Allah. It doesn't have to be Vishnu. It doesn't have to be Buddha. It doesn't have to be any specific name, But just the concept that there is a frequency, a love, unconditional love, an energy that is the glue that binds us all together, is a very easy concept, I think, to grasp. Now, trauma does complicate that quite a bit, but
that's right. True. Yeah. Well, speaking of love, obviously you've worked with Ian on a romantic relationship. Can you tell me a little bit more about that relationship?
Yeah, Jesus. How much time do we got on this podcast, gentlemen?
Well, I'll focus it a little bit, though, also. You're someone who's been through so much growth and transformation. You told us more of that. So I'm curious how your partner entered into that path and what that's been like. And then, what it's been like working with Ian to obviously, I'm assuming, strengthen that relationship and continue on with growth.
Oh, yeah. Well, I had met my wife many years prior to having entered into a romantic relationship with her. Mm-hmm. But I always knew, for some reason, like from the very first, I knew I was going to marry her. And I'll tell her that today, and she'll be like, "You're so full of shit." I'm like, "No, I'm dead serious." And there's just something inside of me. It just, and it came to fruition, But, my wife has suffered atrocious acts and has suffered a lot of trauma in her life, as have I. And when we found our way to Ian, in a lot of ways, like if something didn't change, like we were going to be done. Like there's just, we were not coping well. All of our pasts and our behaviors that were born from trying to keep the past from repeating itself was manifesting the past right here in the here and now. And we didn't have any tools, and we were just on this hamster wheel, just running around in circles. Nothing was being resolved. Nobody was feeling heard or seen. Nobody was feeling valued. Nobody felt safe to communicate. We'd been together just over 3 years, I think, by the time we made our way to see Ian. And, that had been going on quite a while. But we were still just trudging along, holding on to those good moments and just blasting through the bad, you know. But when we began seeing Ian, it was, it always gets rougher before it gets better.
That's right.
It's kind of like even with counseling or communication coaching or anything, like you got to start pulling this crap up by the roots. And
even meditation. That's a surprise that a lot of people have for meditation. You often get more anxious or stressed or whatever it is,
and that stops them from continuing.
That's right.
They're like, wait a minute, my mind won't shut up. I'm worse off. It's like, no. It reminds me of this story I'll tell really quick. I think Tara Brach tells it. This counselor sent their patient or their client to a meditation retreat. And they went, and she came back. She sat down for their session, and she's like, so how did it go? Oh, it was horrible. I felt this more, and I felt that more, and I felt this more, and this was going on, and that was going on. She goes, oh, that's perfect. See, you're finally feeling and identifying your feelings. So when you said that about meditation, it just brought that story up. It's just,
it's the same
a lot
with
of the times,
right?
Yeah, the goal isn't to like stop feeling, it's to feel it, to genuinely feel it so it can be done. And not done necessarily, but processed, to be no longer come in under our consciousness and us not see where it's coming from, which I circle back is a lot of what happened when we worked with Ian. Like what was happening was the behaviors that were perpetuating the conflict. I'll rephrase that. The what seemed to be unresolvable conflict was slowly like being brought to the awareness level, being brought up to consciousness, to where what happened over time was, instead of needing Ian to tell us what was going on, we started doing enough of the practices and using enough of the tools where we were starting to see on our own. Like, I didn't have to tell my wife, and my wife didn't have to tell me. Like, these things were just organically happening. But we're starting to see the source point of these things and starting to understand that it has nothing to do with my wife. Like, she's not causing this. What's causing this is my own response that's attached to my past that's causing me to arrive in the way in which I arrive. Because she's still... Like for me, there's still stuff that comes up that is the exact same that came up when we started working together. The only thing that's changed is me. And I'm sure I arrive in the same ways that stimulate her still today. And the only thing that's changed is her. Not saying neither one of us are beyond growth in those areas. But what I am saying is that what happened along the way was we were able to become unenmeshed. And like the 4 agreements, like you don't have to take it personally. You don't have to, take it personally. You don't have, be impeccable with your word. All those things, and many, many more. Just took hold, and then you see like this kind of observer or witness happening inside of the relationship. We talk a lot about meditation today and a lot of this other stuff. Well, a lot of that's about becoming the observer or being the witness. What I view like the work with Ian as is it's how to be that inside of the relationship. Like how do you become the observer and rather than being stuck in the drama and being the character, I don't know if that makes sense or not, but.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I heard a lot there. I heard a lot about, you mentioned karma before. I think that's a similar thing. I heard a lot about these patterns from the past. That's not often how I think about karma in just a really, almost like physics-minded way of just like there's a momentum, there's a way, there's an inertia in which things have went in the past, and that will continue until something changes. And like you were saying, these containers, the work within, the work you guys did on yourselves allowed for there to be some change to that, where even though some of those same patterns were coming up, they now had a new pathway to go down, a new way. And that seems to have stemmed from awareness. And we'll often say awareness is the first step to change. It's a prerequisite for change so often. And that makes perfect sense. But I've never heard it described that way with the containers, with like, I almost could see that witness just appearing in the relationship through the work you did and the tools you did, and there being, not needing in for everything. It's a teach a man to fish kind of situation, what we strive to do with coaching, of course. And you guys were able to do that for yourselves and each other, and in that unit that you guys have. Yeah.
I have one last question, if you'll allow me. Why, Justin, do you feel compelled to want to go from student to teacher? Why do you want to coach others and share, what you learned with other people?
Well, I mean, that has many answers. I won't try to cover them all. But if one were to look at kind of my life as it evolved over the last 10 years, anything that I have done that has created peace and serenity and growth in my life, I have somehow, some way, found myself in the role of helping other people along that path. I sponsored, I don't know how many people in Narcotics Anonymous. I did meditation, and then I still teach meditation, not as much as I do Kundalini, but it's kind of ingrained into that. Through my teacher training for Kundalini, I grew a lot, and then now I teach that quite a bit, and it helps people. And then I come to the coaching, like our life today, our marriage today, our lives outside of the marriage, work, interpersonal, hell, our relationships with ourselves, after having done the work with you, Ian, are unrecognizable in most days for me. So how can I not want to help somebody else achieve that level of freedom and growth? I mean, so there's that aspect. The other aspect is I believe deeply in karma yoga, and seva and service to mankind, and I believe that there's kind of an epidemic of people that just throw in the towel and walk away from a beautiful relationship, that it doesn't have to be that way. And I mean, there's other components that are required, like willingness to do the work, but just for it to be available for people that do want to grow and heal, and not just do the normal thing and say screw it and get a divorce, or screw it and break up. I mean, there are relationships that are toxic that don't need to carry on any further, but what I'm trying to say really is that there's probably a lot of true love that's lost, an inability to communicate. Probably an unfathomable amount, and I think that if people were to learn the communication skills that my wife and I have learned, that there'll be less suffering in the world, and that there'll be more joy and happiness around the yoga of relationships. Like Ram Dass says, I mean, relationships is the highest form of yoga, and I believe
and the hardest.
Yeah.
And the hardest.
Yeah. So, from a karma yoga standpoint, from a give back standpoint, from a, I can't look at my life and my relationship today and not want to help somebody else achieve that.
It's beautiful, man. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm inspired. I want to be a coach. Oh, wait. I do coach. Okay. I'm going to keep coaching.
Right.
Derek, any final thoughts? Any closing words?
Oh, yeah. Just thank you. Justin, you are a grateful, growing, and giving guy. And I just really appreciate everything you shared today. Just so glad to know you, and glad that you're joining the Helping the Herd team. And I just resonate with so much of what you said and so much of your path. And I hope others were able to resonate and gain inspiration like I did. And I'm just glad to know you're out there in the world, serving, living, loving, and happy to know you. Thanks for being on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
For
thank you,
sure.
Justin. So great to see you. Thank you for sharing all of your experiences and insights. And yeah, thanks for being here as well, Derek. Love you. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for creating space to hear me.
Joy.
This has been the Do You Feel Heard podcast. If you're interested in resources that will help you move through conflict, you can go to doyoufeelheard.com, where we have tools for individuals and couples.